Hello, this is Sammy and I'm very excited to share with you this presentation about the importance of sharing books and stories with young children. And it is very important. Let's look at why. So sharing books and stories with young children aged 0 to 4, it is crucial for their overall development. And what we're going to look at now is 15 key reasons that I've thought about, which is why it's important to share books and stories in your early years setting. Now, of course, by no means these are the only reasons. These are just 15 of my favorites. So let's get started. Obviously, sharing books and stories with young children will support their language and literacy development. That's obvious. Giving them exposure to rich vocabulary, proper sentence structure, thinking about actual language construction like rhythm and rhyme through read aloud stories. It also supports with building listening comprehension and narrative skills. It introduces new words and new concepts, and reading books and sharing stories with children expands their vocabulary beyond the vocabulary that you would use in everyday speech. If you share a book about out of space with children, there's lots of vocabulary in that book that you will share and you will encounter with children that you don't necessarily use in everyday language. The same if you're sharing a book about dinosaurs. How often in your everyday conversations with children are you talking about Tyrannosaurus rexes? When you're sharing a book about dinosaurs, that's exactly what you're doing. So the exposure to vocabulary and language when you're sharing books and stories expands vastly. Sharing books and stories also promotes social and emotional development. It provides opportunities to discuss emotions, experiences, and even moral lessons. As part of social and emotional development, it can nurture a parent-child bond or a teacher or practitioner-child bond, and a sense of security through that shared experience of a book or a story. And also in relation to social and emotional development, developing and promoting an understanding of diversity and different cultures. Sharing books and stories also supports in the expansion of children's attention span and their self-discipline. Regular reading helps children develop longer attention spans and self-discipline. Listening comprehension, it requires focus, attention, and memory retention. One of my favorites, sharing books and stories with children fosters a love of reading and lifelong learning. Children form positive associations with books from an early age, and it motivates them to go on and do independent reading. It instills a love of reading and a commitment to lifelong learning. This all starts in the early years, sharing books and stories. And of course, brain development. Sharing books and stories with children supports brain development. Reading aloud stimulates brain cells connections, which is vital for future learning abilities. And exposure to language and stories aid cognitive and intellectual development, as we've already started to look at. Let's move on to talk about preparing for school. And sharing books and stories with children certainly can move them towards where they need to be for starting school. Supporting early literacy skills does prepare children for reading success when they start school. Having an awareness of books, understanding that print carries meaning, understanding directionality of text, understanding that books have page numbers, that books carry messages. Also develops wider general knowledge and concentration, all of which are required for starting school. We've already touched on this lightly, but let's touch on it a little more heavily. Bonding and attachment. Cuddling up in the cozy corner in the nursery or early years centre with a book, a favourite book with a child, can really work to strengthen the bond between caregiver, be that an early years practitioner, a teacher, a principal, a director of an early years centre, or a parent or a grandparent. But cuddling up in that way with a book and sharing intimately the content of a story or book really does support bonding and attachment. And the close proximity of this shared experience can strengthen that teacher-child, parent-child bond. Reading together creates this sense of intimacy, comfort, and security for a child. Imagination and creativity, absolutely. Stories spark children's creative imaginations as they visualize characters, settings, and events. Engaging with imaginative tales encourages creative thinking and problem solving. Let's think about cultural awareness and understanding. This is certainly something that books aim to do, especially if they're from diverse or different cultures. They can expose children to different traditions, different perspectives, different ways of thinking, and multicultural stories can promote empathy, respect, and appreciation for diversity. Let's think about moral development. So many books often carry and convey a moral lesson about right and wrong, about kindness and values. And discussing these morals, these lessons, help shape children's ethical understanding of the world. We get all this through books and stories. And of course, memory and recall skills. Yes, this is absolutely something that books and stories do. And the more you talk about the stories with the children, and the more you revisit the same stories and the same books over again and make it into a shared experience for children where they get to participate, predict, remember what's coming next. Retelling stories and recalling details improves memory and sequencing. Repetition of favourite books really supports children's memorization. I already touched on vocabulary expansion, but it's a huge one. Supporting children through books and stories introduces new words in new contexts and expands their vocabulary. Hearing new words repeatedly throughout the book or throughout the story reinforces for children their meaning, the meaning of the vocabulary, and how to use the vocabulary. Listening comprehension, sharing books and stories with children definitely does support listening comprehension. Following along with stories develops active listening and comprehension, making sense skills. Understanding narratives is a precursor to reading comprehension later on. And the last one of my 15, and of course I could give you 20 or 30, but we've stopped at 15. And my last one in this group of 15 important reasons why it's so vital that you share books and stories with children is the development of narrative skills. Exposing children to stories that have narratives help children to learn the structure and elements of what a narrative is. This prepares them for understanding and creating their own stories later on, but also retelling their stories now, what they did at the weekend, etc., etc. So, by sharing books and stories with young children regularly, we can provide children with a rich foundation for language, cognitive, social, emotional, and literacy development. And this not only is totally enjoyable, fun, and meaningful in the moment, but sets them up for future success.